first off, thanks for coming, folks. I'm going to go ahead and open the floor for anyone who has questions. This hour is for any questions on messaging for our resident experts.
I have a question.
All right, go ahead.
What is SignalWire's policy, and where do you see the SignalWire's path when it comes to medical cannabis messaging?
I mean, straight in there with a very interesting question.
Yeah.
I can pick up some of this. So I look after carrier operations here at SignalWire. And I have many, many conversations with the US carriers and with the Campaign Registry, who look after the registration of 10 DLC traffic. The issue is because, as far as I'm aware, medicinal cannabis is not federally allowed. It is state-by-state basis, and carriers operate on effectively across all of the states. A message could be legal in one state, but if it went to a recipient in another state, it could be illegal, which causes a whole heap of trouble. That's my understanding of it. Having said that, the carriers and the FCC and the industry generally do understand that this is an issue, and there are conversations going on in the background. But to answer your question with a very straight answer right now is we just follow the procedures and rules that are put in place by the carriers, which says it's unfortunately not really allowed.
And is there a list of terms that can't be in these messages, or?
I think it's kind of complicated, you know. So if someone was doing delivery notifications saying, you know, your parcel or your package is going to be delivered, and that package happened to contain medicinal cannabis or, you know, some other product that's slightly on the ban list, you've got a 50-50 chance that the carriers are going to eventually trace it back and figure out that's what it's for. You know, if you start sitting in there saying, actually, while your package is while you're waiting for delivery, why don't you check out the great sale on our website now of all sorts of paraphernalia? That's going to be a problem, because they'll be straight on that straight away, because carriers have a habit of reading URLs in text messages and investigating. But I think the official answer is there's nothing related allowed, you know, on this subject. There are some people that have got around it in the past by just being very vague and not mentioning brand names, but eventually campaigns have been shut down because the carriers have found out that who the particular brand is and what they're actually doing with those messages, even though there's no content related to that subject in those messages, if that makes sense.
So we do believe that the carriers will get on board eventually with a workaround.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I said, I'm not an expert on US law and different states' laws, but it's the fact that the communication can cross state borders, and that's where it becomes a little bit of a problem.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Kat linked the messaging code of conduct in the chat too, which has some outline, but I suppose it doesn't have like the specific wording you were looking for, Josh.
Yeah, we don't have a list of specific keywords because there are some words that could be related to cannabis or not related to cannabis, such as the word flower. So it gets a little complicated there.
All right. Anyone else have any questions?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure can.
I'm a kind of a new here, not of a much experience. Just a maybe sounds too simple question. I have my own, got my own website. I mean, portal developed. It's multi-tenant. This means that I can have do this marketing for different clients, create their own accounts and do the marketing. And most of them are pretty simple, like a restaurant. They every month they want to send a campaign that this month we are having this special, and please call the following, go to the following link to make a reservation. That's all I have. And they asked me to do like 3 samples of the script I don't know what does that mean. It's such a simple script. I mean, they ask for 3 samples of the script. What does that mean?
Any sort of variation of that message, we want to make sure that our input in the campaign registry is has enough details for our upstream peers to vet the campaign content. So if you have any sort of variation of that message, or if it's going to be the same message sent each month, you may want to just inform the technician that's working on that ticket.
What's the last thing you said?
If there's no variation, if it's going to be the same exact message each month, you might want to let the technician that's working the ticket know. But if there's any sort of variation at all, or if there's like,
no, there's a variation, like they will say it's a Christmas time, or they will say this is our anniversary, so we are having this special on this Saturday. So to make a reservation, please, click on the following web link. That's all I want. So just make a little variation of the same script.
Yes. Yeah. So if you have one for an anniversary, if you have one for a birthday, if you have one for Christmas, we can definitely take those and input them into the Campaign Registry's database. And having those extra sample messages will definitely help with vetting and our upstream peers in case they do need to take a deeper look at your content.
One more question, just this will be my last question actually. Let's say I have 10 clients, I have 10 accounts, different accounts, and they send like some doctors, some restaurants, and this kind of thing. For each client, do I have to create a new, what do you call 10 DLC? I don't know.
Yes, so each client will have to have their own brand registered and their own campaign registered underneath that brand. The idea is that the mobile carriers need to know exactly who is sending messages on their platform. So if you were to input your information as the brand, your company's information, and have all of your customers under one campaign, that isn't going to be enough for the carriers. They need to know who specifically is going to be terminating messages to their network.
So I have to submit their employer's identification number.
Yes.
For each client?
Yes. Each client will have to have an EIN and a brand.
Different brand. Okay.
I think just to add quickly to the last question about sample messages, they are exactly that. They are sample messages. No carrier is going to sit there and say, you've got to, you've decided to say Christmas instead of Easter, or you've decided to say Thanksgiving instead of summer in your sale messages or promotional messages. They're just looking for a gist of what those messages are. Just an example. If you were sending out, if you put in your sample messages that it was messages about restaurant and discounts and last minute availability of tables, and then suddenly something completely different started messaging out, so maybe an auto repair shop or something like that, that's why they want to see what the sample messages look like. It's not the complete concise content of exactly what it looks like. It's just an idea of what you're sending out.
Okay, one more question I had. Some doctors of mine, they want to just send one-to-one texting, not a marketing type thing, like a texting to a patient that your appointment reminder, like you have appointment next week. Do I have to also register them? Do I still have to register a brand for them?
Yes, so that you would have to register a brand and an appointment reminder campaign, not a marketing campaign.
So that's a different thing?
Yeah, campaigns are just a general term for a registration use case. There's multiple types of campaigns. So an appointment reminder campaign would be applicable for these.
And just one-to-one texting, like the employees of the clinic want to text to the doctor, are you coming right now? Patients are waiting for you.
So that would also have to be registered, yes.
All of them have to be registered.
That would be a customer care campaign.
Okay, so every tenant with every customer is registering, they have to pay like $50 fee and those kind of things.
If you have, for example, a mixed use case like appointment reminders and customer care, you could do a mixed campaign type under mixed. That's the name of the campaign use case type.
So just one time $50 fee?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Nicole,
Could
you have
I
your
ask?
hand raised?
I'm sorry. Could I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So if we have an office of health insurance agents and they, like the, I guess, head of that office allows a couple of their agents to use their LLC so let's say 5 people use their LLC to create a brand and a campaign ID, but they're all using the same EIN and business information. Does that cause issues with their deliverability? Because even though each agent has their own brand, has their own unique campaign, but they're all being used under the same LLC, does that cause an issue?
That potentially could. You're supposed to only use an EIN once per
Okay.
service provider. So if you have a campaign with SignalWire and a campaign with someone else, you would have to register a brand twice, once with each service provider. In this specific case, if they're using an EIN or the same EIN, they might be able to register just one brand and one campaign, and all message underneath that one campaign.
But then it seems that they're hitting the volume. If by doing it that way, they hit the volumetric violations very quickly that way, because it's 5 agents messaging, however many leads a day. And like with T-Mobile, if it has a 2,000 per day message limit.
Mm-hmm.
So they would be hitting that pretty quickly, and then start getting blocked almost immediately throughout the day. And what we're finding is like some of the offices, some of the agents, especially newer ones, they don't have an LLC registered. They don't have their own business. So their leadership is allowing them to use theirs. And it seems, we don't know for sure if that's the issue, but it seems that may be causing an issue. And so I just was trying to get a little clarification around that.
So the T-Mobile limit, the daily limit, is tied to the EIN and not the brand ID. If you have multiple brands registered with the same EIN, it's still going to consider that EIN and limit to that EIN. So
Okay.
yes, you will run into issues with that. Also, the use case might be a little iffy because it's leads. You mentioned it's leads. So my question is, how are they gathering opt-in consent to message the consumers? Or are they doing sort of like a cold call text?
No, it's consumer. It's like customers that have reached out to them wanting the information.
Okay.
So they've sent them like, a request like to get like prices.
The best practice for this particular scenario would be to register just one brand, get the brand vetted. That could lead to a higher throughput to T-Mobile, and use one campaign and have all of the agents under that one campaign. So there's a use case type called agents and franchises.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a UCAS use case if you're using some sort of UCAS communication for your main company.
Okay.
Yeah.
With the vetting, I know, so it's like a $2,000 fee for the vetting.
No.
And that's not guaranteed. So if they vet it and then they say, no, too bad, then you're out that $2,000 on top of it, correct?
Vetting actually costs $40.
Oh, I thought I read somewhere that it was like $2,000 for the vetting.
There is something called a special business review. If you go through the vetting process and you are not satisfied with the outcome, you can go through something called a special business review. It costs $5,000. T-Mobile has to review your company's information and either approve or reject the special business review, but it could lead to a higher throughput. That's the questionable one. $5,000, you're out if you don't
Okay,
pass.
but if these offices wanted to, they could vet as like agents and franchises for $40, and then they could put multiple of their agents under that.
Yes, they can do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Another issue you might run into, though, is number pooling. If you need more than 49 numbers assigned to a single campaign,
we would not.
Okay, then you should be okay with just vetting with $40.
Yeah, it would be like multiple offices that could do this. It's like, if they have offices all over the country, then each office had 20 agents. They should each be able to do that and be fine. correct?
If they have their own EIN.
Yeah,
Each
right.
office-
Yeah. Okay.
Then yes, you can do that.
Okay.
I just learned so much from that. All right. We have a question in the chat. We're engaging a site visitor in one-on-one conversations with an individual prospect or customer with unique queries and wish lists. Can you talk about your experience with conversational or transactional SMS messaging practices?
Do you want to go for this one?
Where to start?
I mean, conversational SMS is a use case. It's customer care style use case. It's been used by a number of SignalWire customers. I don't know what else I could tell you about it, really.
I'm familiar with Jan's use case, and
Okay.
I believe it's more related to like an app that a customer could get their own phone number and start texting, like an anonymous phone number. That's a little bit more complicated than customer care. At the end of the day, the carriers need to know who is registering and who is sending messages on their platform. In this particular scenario with like conversational P2P, maybe a second phone line, ideally you would want to go for a P2P exemption, but that isn't something that SignalWire currently offers. This one is very difficult because sole proprietor might be applicable to this use case as well. But this question is very complicated.
So, Jan, are you saying that someone visits a website, there's like a chat pop up, and then they type in a message, and then it gets sent out by SMS to the store or something like that for someone to reply? I'm just looking at your message in chat, and it kind of sounds a little bit like that. Okay, gotcha. Right. So for the benefit of those not watching the chat, so someone sees a phone number, texts in the number, and so it's the agents get the text. So it's effectively a customer care use case.
Yeah, so that would still have to be registered. Like I said, the brand would have to be registered. A campaign would have to be registered. Whoever the company is that is receiving the texts would need to be the brand. That's generally how those are registered. And then I saw another question. Are special use cases more difficult to register than standard? Technically, no. They just require review by the mobile carriers before the throughput is assigned. So in some instances, T-Mobile or AT&T will need to review your special use case before assigning a throughput in the campaign registry. And then also our upstream peers still have to vet the campaign itself. So it still has to go through that normal vetting process, but there's some sort of pre-approval before throughput is assigned.
I think to add to that as well, special use cases, anything with the word special and review in there, it's always going to take that a little bit longer. So be prepared for a little bit longer delay of getting your messaging campaign up and running.
Awesome. Anyone else have questions? Nice, no takers.
Voice versus SMS.
Oh, goodness me. Suddenly a big message appeared in one go. I mean, look, I've been around SMS for more years than I can care to mention, and it's non-intrusive. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't require immediate attention. It can be delivered when your phone's switched off. It's not likely to get lost in this thing that we all used to use back in the day called voicemail that no one ever checks on their phone anymore. Even if you got visual voicemail, very rarely listen to mine. So yeah, SMS is ubiquitous. It doesn't interrupt. It delivers quietly. It can reach everybody. It doesn't need an app installed. You know, things like WhatsApp and other messaging applications, Facebook Messenger require an app. And yeah, of course, as you say, you know, the conversations in the text history. I mean, if you are running a call center, 9 times out of 10, you're recording your calls for quality and training purposes, but also to legally cover yourself when there's an issue, or if a customer is likely to agree a contract over the phone, it's highly likely that that call is recorded. But yeah, you know, there's history in that messaging as well. So yeah, SMS is going to be sticking around for a while. You know, I've always said that person-to-person messaging will inevitably fall. Application to person, where you're messaging someone, an application of some sort, or an agent, and it's coming back, that's just going to grow. What demographic or behavioral groups are most reluctant to use voice calls? I can't remember the age bands for these, but if you're under about 25, phone calls are old school. You know, my kids don't really like phone calls. They know what FaceTime is, but you know, they don't really do phone calls. They're busy on WhatsApp and Instagram and TikTok. That's their kind of thing. But it does seem to be anybody below a certain age doesn't really like picking up the phone or calling people. And I think in a post or semi-post COVID world, since a lot of people started working at home and call centers became a little bit slower to react and to handle calls, people got frustrated with having to sit on hold for ages. So, you know, the growth of online chat and SMS and something where you don't have to sort of sit there wait for 40 minutes and then you've got 3 or 4 seconds to jump and pick up the phone as soon as that horrible music on hold stops. Something that's you know, less you know, less interactive. It's more on your terms. So yeah, I mean, I don't particularly like making phone calls to call centers to sit on hold for 40 minutes. I'd rather just tap in a message and get an answer back whenever they're ready. And I'm a lot older than sort of mid-20s, so.
I also think it might depend on the use case, why you would use SMS over voice. For marketing, SMS all the way. You don't want to market through voice anymore. No one wants to be sold something over the phone. No.
I mean, you know, I get spam calls on my phone from all sorts of random call centers with random numbers, and it's frustrating, and I block them. Text messages, you know, a little less, but still, you know, I would prefer something that doesn't interrupt my day, that doesn't actually make me pick up the phone, look at it. And even if I reject the call, it's still interrupting my flow of what I'm doing. Whereas SMS, inevitably half the time I look anyway, but I don't have to. I can put the phone on Do Not Disturb. I don't have to actually react to that. You text each other in the same house. Yeah, my kids do that to me as well. You know, if I'm in another room, they'll start texting me instead of walking. Back in my day, it was my parents shouting up the stairs. But yeah, you know, SMS is useful for that. Are abbreviations in transactional SMS messaging commonly used and acceptable to visitors? I think if you were a company messaging and, you know, typed in LOL or PMSL in your corporate messaging, you might get a few eyebrows raised. You know, I appreciate there is a character limit in SMS, but it's better to be clear and straightforward and not abbreviate unless, you know, someone absolutely knows what, you know, instead of doctors, it says DRS. Let's say everybody would, if you're in a conversation with your doctor's surgery, or your, you know, general practitioner, absolutely, it's in context. Whereas if you suddenly start using amazing terms that only you might know, keep it simple. URLs for abbreviations. What, text speak? I mean, maybe. I mean, that's a very good question. Depends what age group you're in and what exactly you think is text speak. Okay, here we got a question, KC. I have a question regarding assignment numbers. It seems like you can only assign one number per campaign. No, Kat can pick that one up and how many numbers you could assign to a campaign.
49.
There you go. Anything above 50 requires something called number pooling, which is almost a special business review case at that point. It is something that is complicated. It's also something that can be expensive.
That is $2,100.
Yeah,
That's where
it's
that
not get,
$2,000 charge you might have seen earlier.
yeah, absolutely, and it's from previous experience, it's not guaranteed to succeed. The
And that one
carriers
is
are
upon
particularly,
approval.
yeah,
So special business review, that's $5,000 upfront. Number pooling, that's $2,100 upon approval.
yeah.
You cannot assign the same numbers to multiple campaigns, and it is not suggested if you ever need to transfer numbers between campaigns. There's chances that that could break the number and require manual intervention to fix.
Multiple campaigns of the same number of trivia games and sweepstakes. No, keep your campaigns separate, especially keep your business cases if they're precise ones like that. Keep them away from other campaigns. You don't particularly want to be running sweepstakes on.
Yeah. Sweepstakes are part of explicitly prohibited content. I would definitely try to be careful with those or anything related to gambling, money. Trivia though would be okay.
Yeah. You can have I was just about to say you can have as many. You can have up to 49 numbers on a campaign. You can have one, or you can have 49. It's anything in between those two. You don't have to have the whole 49. It's just when you go past that 49 into 50, requires number pooling. And like I said just now, complicated and can get expensive, and it's not guaranteed success. I mean, there's very few use cases that require number pooling. It's anything you put into SignalWire will be manually reviewed first, and we will tell you if you're unlikely to get number pooling. We're not just going to take the money and run. So, like I said, very few use cases. You can't use register a business phone number for use across campaigns. No, a number should only exist on one campaign. And like Kat says, try not to move them, because it's not just the case of it's moving them across categories. It can cause trouble later on down the line. One particular carrier is very slow at moving numbers and changing routing, etc. for these things. So it's best to start with clean numbers and not to move them around too much. Any other questions? I'm just waiting for a mountain of text to appear with a very long, complicated question. Upstream requirement. Yeah, so 10 DLC was a product, a specification agreed by the mobile carriers. Some have louder voices in that little group than others. And then they got a company set up called the Campaign Registry, or they asked for a company to be set up called Campaign Registry that runs the administration of 10 DLC. So it's a 10 DLC rule or requirement that is policed or managed by the Campaign Registry. You're welcome.
Awesome. Anyone else have any questions?
What's a good way to segue into a voice call with a prospect and leave SMS? I mean, that's more of a psychological question than an SMS question. I don't know. Maybe, how would you get someone off using SMS onto a phone call? Suggest that it would be easier to discuss on a quick call, or do you have time for a quick call to discuss?
Yeah, especially if it's a customer care use case. It would be acceptable to say, hey, would you mind if we scheduled a quick call?
So that wouldn't run afoul of any of the like messaging templates and things like that, or would you want to see that when they're registering as well?
It's not related to the messaging campaign.
Mhm.
More related to what the brand is doing. But as long as consent is obtained, a voice call would still be acceptable if consent is obtained.
I mean, one thing just to add to that, and I'm not suggesting anyone here has done that, but if a customer ever messages stop and doesn't want any more messages, don't reply to them suggesting they could give you a call instead and you'll make it all better. We have seen that before and it's not looked at very favorably. Stop does mean stop. It doesn't mean, you know, it's sort of one last excuse to try and pitch to them. So
it is acceptable to send one final message saying, thank you for opting out. If you want to opt back in, reply unstop. But that's it.
Yeah.
You don't want to send
but
you don't want to call them.
But even in a conversational customer care SMS use case, stop means stop. That stops the conversation right there and then. You cannot continue that conversation. It's almost like the SMS equivalent of someone just putting the phone down on a voice call to a call center. You just stop means stop. You decided not to even send us confirmation. I mean, that's your choice. You know, industry practice does allow that final confirmation that you have been unsubscribed on 10DLC. There have been, I've heard of cases in the past where people have got particularly grumpy about they've received a message and then tried to take legal action. But, you know, the industry is quite clear about it. You are allowed that final confirmation.
It does look better from the end perspective if you do send a final opt-out message. Because otherwise, like if I were to reply stop to someone's campaign and I don't receive anything, that makes me wonder, did they receive my message or not?
Correct.
Anyone else have questions? All right, mercy for you two, for the moment anyway. There's a question in the chat about hearing from the person who was setting up the health agent. That's going to be up to them if they want to talk about it a little more. But in the meanwhile, can we hear a little bit about what we like to see in the vetting process when folks are setting up their campaigns and whatnot? We saw a couple of questions about that in the live wire, like what's a good example message, and we touched on it here too.
Let's see, in terms of vetting, some of the things that we look at and our upstream peers look at is starting with the brand. If you provided a website URL, that is now something that has been required. If there's no website URL presented in the brand information, it's likely going to be rejected. The campaign will be rejected, even though it isn't technically the brand. Having multiple clear examples of sample messages is a best practice. So if you just provide one sample message of the content that you are trying to send, it's not going to be enough for the carriers to determine what your use case is exactly and what it's going to be used for. Having a clear description of what the campaign is going to entail is very important. Some people have provided very short responses like, this is a marketing campaign. That is not going to be enough. What is the marketing campaign for? What are you sending? How often are you sending messages? How are you collecting opt-in consent? Or are you getting your subscriber list from a third party, which is not going to be okay. You have to get direct consent now. especially for a marketing campaign. And depending on the use case, if it's informational, verbal consent may be applicable, but for the most part, you really want to make sure that it's written consent. And there's some sort of timestamp in case you have to provide that information to the carrier. What else? Just don't go into it with half answers. You want to think out specifically what you're doing in terms of messaging, and relay that information to us when we either register it for you or we pass the registration upstream to our carrier peers for their vetting process.
Awesome.
I mean, just to add to what Kat said, the more detail, the better. If you put a website down there, which is beginning to be required in a number of cases, make sure the website works. Make sure it doesn't go to a coming soon under construction page or something like that, because we need all the detail. The more, the better. Dot the I's, cross the T's. Make it as verbose and detailed as possible. Don't skip on detail. And at the end of the day, be nice to the agent that may come back to you and ask for more details, because it's not us being particularly annoying and asking for a little bit more information. It's because we've been through this so many times with other customers, and we know what we're going to be asked for if there's a query on this. So the more detail, the better. The more accurate, the better. Don't just be vague and put down rubbish in there, because it will get bounced back and you will have to do it again.
If for some reason upstream vetting is rejected, so as most of you should know, our DCA charges $15 as a vetting fee per each new campaign connection request that comes in. If that vetting is rejected, we have to collect more data and resubmit it, and that acts as a new vet. So that's going to be another $15 charge. And each time it's rejected and has to be resubmitted is a new $15 charge. So it's very important to us that we submit a complete campaign the first time, and we don't have to suffer from a rejection. We don't like being rejected, okay? I don't handle rejection well. But that's something to keep in mind. Like quality content, the carriers really need to know who is messaging and what they are messaging on to their subscribers. That's the most important bit of information you should keep in mind when you create campaigns and when you create and register brands.
And also for the folks in here, I've put a link to our LiveWire session from this last week in the chat. That's the recording. You can just click and grab it. Basically, we went through the how to set up brand and campaign and kind of a general look at the use cases and what folks might be registering for. So that's some more good information if you'd like some extra follow-up. Got a comment in the chat to potentially invite a messaging expert to come in to talk about marketing topics. That's an interesting one.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, it beats talking about political topics, which is always a bonus.
What questions related to marketing do you have?
And while Jan's typing, Kat, would you like to talk a little bit about mixed use? It's come up a couple different times here, and when we consider mixed use versus like customer care or one of the other topic areas.
So if you have a brand that needs multiple use cases, like if you have a marketing use case, if you have an account notification use case, if you have a customer care use case, if you have some sort of informational use case, sometimes it's better to have separate campaigns. Sometimes you just want to have one campaign with one mixed use case. So in the case of marketing, if you're ever going to have any sort of marketing, we suggest having a separate use case for marketing. The reason for that is sometimes a lot of marketing campaigns get a lot of spam complaints, even when you gather legitimate opt-in. And those spam complaints can affect your campaign if you receive enough of them, whether it be throttling or your messages being flagged as spam. Our favorite use cases, the informational type, which would be account notifications and customer care, we don't like those being blocked for no reason. And sometimes if they're on a mixed campaign type with a marketing campaign, there is a higher likelihood of those getting blocked. So we suggest splitting those off into a separate campaign. But if you have multiple informational use cases, like if you have an account notification one, a customer care one, and maybe like 2FA, and you don't need a high throughput, like if you don't have a high volume of messages that are going to be sent, it would be totally acceptable to have one mixed use case. If you need higher throughput, it's suggested to split up those use cases into multiple campaigns. Of course, you're going to run into the issue with T-Mobile, who restricts at the brand level, but AT&T and their throughput is more at the campaign level. If you have a high throughput, I suggest separate campaigns. If you have a low throughput, I suggest one campaign.
Nice, thank you.
So demographics, conversational style and tone for one-on-one site visitors. Let's see. What do you want to know about the demographics? Are we seeing certain age groups more than others, or how are certain age groups responding to certain message types? Real-time conversations, not getting SMS marketing messages.
I mean, I guess the answer is that your customer or the brand will know their demographic of their customer base better than we would, and would probably understand more of whether they're likely to text. You know, if you're targeting the over 75s, you might have a less of a response to SMS than you would do the 20 to 25 market. So it really depends what the brand does, what market they're targeting, what the demographics look like.
And if a lot of the conversation between the business and the customer is conversational, in terms of templates, you want to have just general, you can have up to 5 templates. You want general sentences that would be relayed from the business. It doesn't have to be anything specific or exact, but just a gist of the topic that will be discussed. For one-on-one site visitors, it's still required that you gather opt-in consent first before messaging them. First message from a site visitor is most often a request or query about a service. So if an incoming message, the first message is, how much is a brake job for a VW 2019 Golf? So if the subscriber is reaching out first, then it would be acceptable for the business to respond, because that's consent. That's implied consent because the customer or the subscriber is initiating the conversation. Will it come up with carriers? Yes, and we'll need to prove to the carriers that the subscribers are reaching out first. So screenshots would be applicable. The website itself, if you have the link to the website that shows or displays the number.
Just to add to that, carriers get particularly upset when there's an accusation by someone receiving a text that they didn't opt in. So make absolutely sure that you are getting consent to send that visit to your website, or anybody that you're sending SMS to. Make sure you get consent. And it's also important to note that it's not just once you've got that consent, you need to keep your lists clean and make sure that they're up to date on an ongoing basis. So there is actually a national disconnected numbers database where you can, if you're a large user of SMS marketing, it might be worth looking into. that you can scrub against. So if a number was, say for instance, you got consent on, let's say the 1st of July last year, and we're now on the 17th of August, you check the number against that database, and it pops up and says, no, it was actually disconnected on the 1st of May. Okay, so it's highly likely that if that number, if you're sending SMS to it, it's not the same person that opted in. It's not the same person you got consent from, because that number's been recycled. This comes up a lot more in the political sphere than anything non-political, but it's worth mentioning. I'll put a link in the chat to the database.
And to add to that, if a subscriber is reaching out first, it would be a best practice for you to establish some sort of double opt-in. So your first message to that subscriber would be, you have reached out to brand. Please reply with X to receive messages from brand. Reply stop to opt out. Message and data rates may apply. And that is called double opt-in consent. That gives the carriers a timestamp saying that the subscriber opted in directly.
Awesome. Anyone else have any questions?
Double opt-in isn't required. It's just the best practice. It's best for marketing and any sort of marketing or political campaign if you can. For informational, it's not as imperative because there's the implication that you're only going to receive messages from some sort of event. Like if it's an appointment reminder, it's going to be when your next appointment is. That's the trigger. Messaging for marketing is a little bit different because brands have to decide how often and how frequently they're going to send messages out to consumers. So is it like once a week or once a month or anywhere in between? That's when you really want to make sure that double opt-in is used. So these are short conversations, most likely minutes, and then the conversation expires and the number is deleted from the database. So you don't keep a subscriber list. And that would work. That would be fine. That also, it's still in the customer care realm, which is more on the informational side of use cases.
Awesome. Last call for questions.
Thank you for your questions, Jan.
Definitely, thanks. That was a lot of great questions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Seems like everyone's got their answers that they need, so we'll just let folks go a couple minutes early. Thank you again, everyone, for stopping in, asking your questions.
Yep.
And yeah, we'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.